Hey, I'm Aaron, and this is my buddy Eric. Say hi, Eric.
Hello.
Today we want to talk about comparing my hacked 3DS and my hacked PlayStation Vita. We want to get to the bottom of which device is the best device to carry around with you in your pocket as far as a portable machine that has a library of games available to you. What do you think, Eric? You're the one that hacked both of these systems for me because I'm kind of a dumbass.
Well, I think it's great.
So here we have our 3DS and our PS Vita. These two systems were, more or less contemporary to each other. The 3DS, I think, came out in 2011, was it? And I think the PS Vita came out in 2012. They were pretty close to each other. As everybody knows, the PlayStation Vita was a failure. Not that many people had it. I think it only sold about 10 or 13 million or something.
No, I'm not even really 100% sure, to be honest.
The 3DS, coming off the heels of the Nintendo DS, which was one of the most successful systems of all time. I think it sold 140 or 50 million or 60 million, something crazy anyway. I know the Nintendo Switch is creeping up on the DS and the PS2 as likely to become the best-selling system of all time, whereas the 3DS, as impressive as it was for the time, it only sold about half or a little bit better than half of what the DS did. Did you have a 3DS back in the day, Eric?
No, I got mine a couple of years ago for $45. I have the 2DS, not the 3DS.
Did you have a DS back in the day?
I did, yes.
See, you're the perfect example because, everybody and their brother had a DS, and they probably had a DS, and then they got a DS Lite, and then they got a DSi, but not as many people had the 3DS, and you can see my battery indicators flashing here, so I don't know how much longer this is going to last, but hey, that's par for the course when you're shooting a low-budget video, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about the 3DS here a little bit. What do we have here? What went into hacking this? Was it hard? Was it easy? I know it was a few months ago, but you've done this a few times.
Yeah, at times it can be a little hard. I mean, you got to follow the guide because sometimes, though, you get lost, and then I don't know. I pulled it off. I mean, it works, it runs, and I couldn't be more happier.
I get a little bit overwhelmed with some of these hacks for some of these systems. When I was looking to hack a Wii with my son Kaz back a couple of years ago, I remember that it was really complicated. There was a lot of stuff where you had to put files on like an SD card and then move them back and forth between the Wii and install all these different channels and things like that, and it got pretty overwhelming. I was not successful at the time. Is it kind of similar with the 3DS where there's a lot of different steps and you really have to pay attention to what you're doing?
Well, first off, you got to install the firmware, and then there's something like a recovery mode that's somewhat like the Wii. But as far as the Wii goes, there was something called iOS's or something like that. I really don't understand how all that works, but the games ran off certain iOS's, and Homebrew was kind of similar in that aspect, whereas once you get the firmware installed on the 3DS, you can play your games the way you want to play them. It's not bad. I think it's more difficult when you have to put ROMs on from the PC, I suppose, because you have to do a lot of converting. But
yeah, I noticed that when we first hacked the 3DS that I was trying to use the ROMs that I had already downloaded, and they required being transferred into different formats, and then we had to re-download some CIA files or something like that. And then we discovered the H-Store, right?
Yep.
And that's basically like a storefront that you can just go and directly download whatever you want directly to the 3DS, and that's been pretty fantastic. I guess that's a kind of a new thing since this 3DS shop went down.
I think it was around sometime last year. And as far as getting the ROMs CIA, I think we had to convert it with a certain software.
Yeah.
I think on the system itself, you can download it from the HS store, and I think it officially installs just like that. Whereas if you had to use a CIA file, I think you had to use something called FBI to install it.
Right. Yeah, it's FBI's here on the.
Like a homebrew anyway. Like I know homebrew software, that's what you use to install. So I think it's similar with yeah, the other files, like commercial.
So, having done that a few months ago, and then doing the PS Vita here just a couple of weeks ago, did you find the Vita easier or harder to hack?
Again, it comes down to you know, sometimes you're having to pay attention. Sometimes you get lost, but then you reread something and you're like, oh, okay, that's how it's supposed to be done. Yeah, so I mean, I think it works out a lot easier. There is some steps of having to get the SD to Vita cartridge working,
Right.
so you can change your main save, like where you're saving to, it would be on the card.
Yeah, that's another thing too that you have to know with the Vita system is that in order to hack it, you have to actually buy an adapter that fits in the game cartridge slot that accepts an SD card as well, so that you can have some storage space. I mean, you can, I guess, boot off of the Vita memory cards, but most people don't have a very big one. So if you want a large amount of games stored, you're going to have to get that SD to Vita adapter, right?
Yeah, and the funny part of that's where I kind of got lost, because I was reading through the guide on how to install it, and you know, then having to copy the memory card over so you don't lose any of the files, and then you can completely delete the memory card. But there was a few sections down where it said these are the files you may not want to remove because it will remove the firmware. Well, if you're using, as far as I see, as long as you have the SD to Vita cartridge going, you don't have to worry about the firmware being gone. But yeah, if you don't have the cartridge in there, then you don't have the firmware. So yeah, that's something to watch out for. Make sure you have the firmware still on your memory card. That way, if you do want to revert back to the memory card, you know, it's there.
So looking at the hardware itself, there were only really two models of the PS Vita, the launch model that had the OLED screen, and then the next model, you know, what's called the 2000 or whatever.
2001, I think.
And it had a more normal screen, but it was a little bit slimmer. They called it the Slim. It was, you know, the jury's out on which one's the best. I think most people prefer the OLED screen because it is really a very beautiful screen.
Yes, yeah.
The 3DS has several different iterations. You've got, this is a launch model, teal, blue, aqua blue, whatever they called it, 3DS. They came in black and blue at launch, and then there were many other models, including an XL, which was the, you know, basic 3DS upsized, and then they came out with the 2DS, which was that weird doorstop tablet thing that was all flat and didn't fold closed. Then they came out with the 3DS, the new 3DS, and it looks like we're powering down here now. They came out with the new 3DS, which was a regular 3DS size, which was mostly available in Japan, but they did have a couple versions that came out here. And then here we mostly got the new 3DS XL, which is pretty much the definitive version of the console because it, you know, it plays everything. It has the most horsepower. It's bigger. It's more comfortable to use. But I really like the launch model myself for hacking because to have all these games on the go, slip it in your pocket, this is really the most portable console. And the fact that it folds closed and protects the controls, I kind of like that. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of like that. I really wanted to get my hands on a 3DS XL, mostly because, yeah, with the emulator and such, like Super Nintendo games were only compatible with that model, and certain games like Minecraft were as well. And I think the sad part about that model is it didn't, like, they brought it out at a late time, and then, you know, the Switch was right around the corner, so it's, I don't, like, they're all...
There's not as many of them out there.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of those new 3DS XLs sold, but right at the end of the 3DS's life cycle, I think we're talking 2016 or something, they announced the 2DS XL, which was a folding closed variant of the 2DS. In other words, it didn't have the 3D feature, but in every other way, it was a 3DS. And A lot of people consider that to be the definitive 3DS because it's very clean, the screens are nice, it's lighter. Some people don't like it because it feels more cheaply manufactured, like more plasticky and whatever, but I really like it. I would take either one of the new 2DS or 3DS models as being pretty much definitive as far as like the best you can get for that library. The thing is, though, like when you compare the hardware, there is no question that the PlayStation Vita, this is just a premium device. Like it looks nice, everything is very comfortable. You've got all these like metallic accents and stuff. You've got these little grips on the back. You've got like this touch screen on the back. The cameras, like even the flaps over the game cartridge slots and stuff are very premium feeling. You do have, oh my gosh, two thumbsticks, which the 3DS did not have by default, although shortly after the Vita released, they did release an add-on that gave you a second thumbstick. The thing is, with most 3DS games, they didn't actually support the thumbstick anyway, so it wasn't really the greatest add-on. But what do you think of the hardware of the Vita?
I think it's pretty amazing. Like, when you're comparing it to the 3DS, I mean, it blows it out of the water. But as the main issue here was that Sony didn't put too much support into it, and I remember actually hearing some rumors that they kind of knew it wasn't going to work out, and they thought it was a big mistake. And I don't think it would have been. I mean, if they listened to what people were saying, bring out more games, it would have been great.
I think the biggest drawback to the Vita was the proprietary memory and the fact that to get something like a 64 gig memory card back in the day in 2012 was going to cost you, I think, upwards of nearly $200, which is like the price of the entire console. So most people only had the 4 gig or 2 gig that came with it, or they might have upgraded to like a 8 gig or a 16 gig, which is just not enough storage space. I've discovered downloading games after the hack here that many of the good games on the Vita are 2.5 to 3 gigs a piece. So if you have an 8 gig card, you're really only getting 2 games. So this is at a time where they were still really focused on physical media. The problem is the console was a failure. Nothing really sold very well on the console, and now the physical media is absurdly expensive. Like, have you tried to buy a Vita game recently?
Well, every time I go to a store and I see them, they're pretty crazy in price. So I'm kind of I don't know if I'm gonna collect for it anymore, to be honest.
Yeah, I've been looking at the best way to access the Atelier series of games because I want to go back and play. I played Atelier Ryza and I played Atelier Sophie 2 on the Switch and really liked them. So I wanted to go back to some of the older games, and they're available on the PS3, and several of them, like 8 of them, are available on the Vita. So I kind of wanted to get the ones that were available on the Vita because just to give me something to do on the Vita. And holy hell, those games they're like $100 each, and there's 8 of them. I mean, that's like a mortgage payment for some people. So being able to just pick these up, I mean, obviously, whatever your morality scale is on piracy, whatever, let's not get into that discussion. But, to be able to just step in and grab these games at the push of a button is really fantastic as far as the context of a hacked console. Do you have you have a Vita right now, right?
I have a Vita and a PS TV. Well, right now currently packed, but yes, I have both systems.
What do you think of the PS TV hacked?
The PS TV hacked is pretty interesting. Obviously, we know that not every game for the PS Vita is compatible. There is certain hacks, but I remember having an issue where there was still a couple of games that weren't really supported.
That's after you whitelisted it?
Yeah, the whitelist. That's basically what it is to hack, yeah.
Yeah, so the idea with the PS TV, for those of you who don't know, is it's basically just a Vita motherboard inside a little box, so it plays Vita games on your TV, and it would come bundled with like a PS3 controller. So it has no screen or anything like that on it. The problem with the PS TV was that it was only compatible with like 30 or 40% of the library because of controller issues and things of that nature. But looking specifically at the hardware, I think the PS Vita is much more powerful than the 3DS. The screen resolution is much better. The screen itself is much bigger. You would think that this would have been more of a success than it was.
I gotta say something. When we talked about these models too, I wanted to throw this in here because we're talking about comparisons earlier between the 1000 and the 2000 model. I think to decrease in price, they do make the 2000 model slim. Like I always feel like they build them a little bit cheaper. Like
Yeah.
they use a very awful plastic or something. Um, the PSP was kind of similar too, where the first model was just absolutely beautiful, and then the slim models, sure, it may have added the TV out, but it was just all plastic, very cheaply made.
So when you look at the hardware of the 3DS over most of the models had this like this folding closed, form factor, which carried over from the DS and even the Game Boy Advance SP. And the idea here is that when that's closed, the buttons are protected, the screen is protected. I feel a little bit nervous sliding the Vita into my pocket and maybe catching on these thumbsticks and maybe scratching up the screen and stuff. I don't feel nervous at all sliding this into a backpack or into my pocket, even if there's some change or something, keys or whatever in my pocket.
Well, part of the one problem with the Vita is its joysticks. This happened to my model. They're made of rubber, and this is a sort of rubber like you've seen in some YouTube videos with the like old rubber just kind of getting sticky. Yeah, that seems to happen, but you can buy third-party replacements. As far as that goes for the Vita, that's the worst part. I'm not a big fan of the joysticks. Yeah.
So yeah, I really do like the circle pad on the 3DS. It's one of my favorite ways to control a lot of these games. This one here, the rubber actually came off of, but it still functions just fine. It's just a little bit slipperier. I wish this had some power on it, but let's talk a little bit about the library. So the 3DS has an absolutely legendary library, similar to the PS Vita, because it's backwards compatible with some other stuff. So the 3DS plays pretty much every DS game. Natively, you just plug the cartridge in and it plays automatically. And from a hacker's perspective, I actually have one of those, cartridges that you can plug in that has a little SD card in it. What do you call, clone cartridges or whatever, that has like hundreds of DS games on it. And between the hack for this console that gives me all the 3DS games I want and that cartridge that has all the DS games I want, I have an enormous library at my fingertips on this tiny little device that's like literally smaller than the palm of my hand. The Vita, it does have access to PS1, correct?
Yes, PS1.
And it does have access to select PSP titles that were available on the storefront, but it's not fully backwards compatible.
When we talk about the hack though, then you're able to play most of the library. I think there was still some certain issues with some PS1 games, and that's why like they blocked them off from the store. And most of them did have some licensing issues and stuff like that, so there was that. But yeah, they were.
But it is pretty impressive. There are like huge amounts of games that are available on both of these consoles. I feel like the Vita is limited a little bit by the gimmick that it came out with. They launched this thing with the whole idea that you could have home console games in your hand on the go. And well, in 2012, that was really cool. Looking back on that now, I don't feel like that's really a major selling point because we have shit like that on the Switch, right? And on the Steam Deck, for example, where you can play whatever you want on the go, but I am mostly drawn in a handheld to games that are a little more casual in nature. Not to say that they're easier, but games like, say, arcade style games, shoot 'em ups, beat 'em ups, things like that that I can drop in, play for 15 or 20 minutes in the car, and drop out, complete a level and move on. And I find that so many of the games on this, things like your Uncharted Golden Abyss or something, they seemed to be just basically there to be impressive on a handheld. But in reality, I don't think that many people really want to look at this 5-inch screen for a 25 or 30-hour story-based game. I don't know about you.
Yeah, see, that's why I bought the PS Vita or PS TV, sorry, mostly, because I was able to play the games on the TV. So, yeah, I generally don't like holding a system in my hand to play. I'm more of a TV guy, so.
See, I really enjoy handheld, and like I do like to play certain JRPGs and stuff on the Switch and in handheld and that sort of thing. Like I do enjoy it from time to time, but looking at a hacked console with the library that's available between these two consoles, you look at the 3DS and you've got stuff like Mario and Kirby and Chibi Robo Ziplash and like so many of these platformers where you can go in for literally 3 minutes, beat a level, save, and put it away. So whether you're on the toilet or whether you're on the bus or whether you're cooking food or waiting for the kettle to boil, you can do something on this little device for 3 or 4 minutes and feel like you've actually gotten somewhere in the game, right?
Yeah.
With a lot of stuff like Gravity Rush here. Gravity Rush is fantastic. What a treasure that game is. But you have to play in that game until you get to a save point. So you might be stuck there for 20 or 30 minutes until you get to that next save area, right?
Yeah, I think the funniest thing about this as well is that like my favorite game it was Wipeout, and with the PS TV you're able to use a PS3 or PS4 controller. I can't remember what I beat it on. It could have been the Vita, but some of the problems I had with the joysticks again. I have third party. What are they called again?
A grip or something?
Yeah, like a little grip on top, and I keep hitting the X button or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's where it comes again for me, the PS TV. But yeah.
There are definitely compromises when you're using a handheld, obviously. It's the same with the Switch. The Joy-Cons are kind of awful. Like, really, they are. And playing the Switch in handheld can be quite uncomfortable unless you have, like, a Satisfy grip or something. And even then, it's not great compared to the experience of using your Pro Controller, which is an excellent controller, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Everything feels a little janky on those Joy-Cons because the throw on the thumbsticks is off. They're too small. The buttons are too close together. The layout kind of stinks. And it just makes your hands cramp. And it's kind of the same thing with either one of these, like over a period of time. And that's why I say the 3DS XL is kind of better, because when you're holding this thing, your hands are kind of like clustered up behind you. There's just not enough room. On a bigger device, or if you have a grip or something. I do have a grip. I didn't think to grab it for the PS Vita that actually makes it a lot more comfortable. I'll have to show you that later. But, if you look into some of these things, you can make the handheld experience better. But looking at the library, I think the 3DS is the clear winner in terms of the library available to you on the go. There are some wonderful, wonderful top-tier experiences on the Vita. Of course, Gravity Rush, right? The Ease games. Let me see here. Final Fantasy X and X-2, the Atelier games, the Trails of Cold Steel games, Shantae, like there's Tokyo Xanadu is another Falcom game that's fantastic. And, I have a 256 gig card in here that I've barely touched. So, there's room for a whole lot more than what I have on here. I'm looking forward to diving into this library more, but I just feel like I'm not going to have as much fun with this as a handheld as I do with the 3DS.
Well, there was something else I wanted to include here, because we've been pointing at it the whole time. but the menu system.
Yes.
Yeah, the bubbles. Yeah, this thing is weird, you know?
This is a relic from 2012. Like, this is exactly what you would expect to see on some groundbreaking Samsung phone from 2010 or something like that, that lasted one generation. And, you know, the UI is really annoying. Everything's touchscreen. These bubbles are annoying. The fact that when you open a menu, there's only room for a certain number of apps per bubble. So let's say I wanted to put all my JRPGs in one bubble to organize them. I can't. I can only put like 7 or 8 in each bubble. So I would end up having to have like JRPG A to B and JRPG C to D, and you know, like all it's really not great, but it is a relic of its time, and it is pretty snappy. I have to give it that. Like, it's responsive. The UI is responsive, but I'm not a big fan. I do think it's unfortunate that the 3DS powered off here, because the grid tile layout of the 3DS, I think, is vastly superior to the bubbles layout on the Vita. What do you think?
Yeah, well, the other thing I'd like to include here is like when you're talking about having the bubbles like for folders to have other apps in it. The reason why he's doing that is because you're limited on how many pages you can have for games.
Yeah, there's only so many pages. I can add a couple more pages, but there's only so many pages you can have, and then you're forced to put everything in folders. Now, that isn't really that big of a problem for a normal person, because I think nobody really needs to have more than 30 or 40 games installed at any given time. You can only play a couple at a time, right? Even if you go back and forth. So you could always delete it and put something else on later, but it's still kind of annoying to be limited that way.
Yeah, I think there's a certain, as far as I know, there might be a certain app available for hacked firmware where you can have a lot more apps, but I'm not really sure. I thought I heard about something about that, and that would be a plus.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know, guys. What do you think? Like, what would you say from the perspective of a hacked console, if you could only have one hacked console that would have, you know, the most games that you're interested in available to you in your pocket on the go? Which one would it be for you?
For me, I don't know. I played more of the PS Vita, and the fact that it is a powerhouse for emulation as well. Yeah, that would be my go-to. It's got top-notch graphics and stuff. It's beautiful.
The graphics are really good on it comparatively. Like, it looks like a PS3 in your pocket. I can't complain about that. The graphics on the 3DS are sacrificed because instead you have two screens that processor is having to render out, but that gives you a whole other functionality that is kind of cool as well. I've never really had a problem with the graphics of the 3DS as long as the game was developed with the 3DS in mind in the first place, and to have more of a chibi cartoon art style or something. I actually like the way a lot of those 3DS games look, but I do notice when they try to shove a third-party game on there, like, you know, that Metal Gear Solid 3D remake that came out, I thought it was kind of crappy. I mean, it was impressive, but it was kind of crappy at the same time. And, you know, some of those other third-party, you know, Capcom did pretty good, I think, with those Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2. Those looked amazing on the 3DS.
Well, I was going to throw in there too, like when you brought up the Capcom name, there's one game I got stuck in my head. Street Fighter 4. They did a powerhouse on that one too.
I was just listening to Scott the Woz go on yesterday or the day before, one of his videos going on and on about how great of a job they did with Street Fighter 4, how impressive it was. And
beautiful.
I mean, I can't argue with the guy. You know, it's really this tiny little screen. I mean, what is this, 3 inches or something? I don't remember, but you know, it's not too hard to push graphics to a 3-inch screen, but it actually looks good. Like, I'm pretty happy. Now, the one thing you did mention was emulation. We haven't really gotten into emulation on either one of these devices, but you're saying there is more emulation that we could do on this outside of PSP and stuff?
Well, I mean, like I said, right, I think it's almost got the power of the PS3. I wouldn't say full blown, but
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. This is a powerhouse for emulation, and the homebrew.
So you
seems
can
great.
run all of your normal like Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance and stuff like that on it, you think?
Yeah, those should run fairly well. I think, when you're talking about N64 and stuff like that, that's where the issues start.
Now, I know the 3DS handles all of its virtual console stuff here with
Yeah.
the hacked, so I don't really know whether that's like native emulation or how that works, but you can go and get Super Mario 64 or something like that on the 3DS through the hacked storefront and play it, but it was a 3DS version of the game because
Yeah.
it was a virtual console game. So I don't know if that really qualifies as emulation, but you do have access to all of those games as well.
Well, if you remember, they did have Mario 64 for the DS, so
Yeah.
that I'm not sure if they had the 64 version, but
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I know there was a ton of virtual console games on the 3DS, like all the old Pokemon games and things like that from the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance and all that sort of stuff are available on this. So
well, there was something else we missed out on that I wanted to throw in there too. The DSi came out and it had a small library for online as well.
yeah,
And some of those games were carried over to the store. I mean, yeah, you can't buy them now, but with the hacked firmware, I'm sure you can get away with having the DSi games on there as well. So.
yeah, yeah. All right, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show today. Your input was super valuable.
Yeah, no
What do
problem.
you guys think there out in YouTube land? If you could choose between one of these two devices, what is your vote? Is it for the mighty, beautiful PS Vita or the super utilitarian 3DS that just keeps on kicking no matter what? Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Stay classy.